The air hung heavy with the scent of pine and damp earth. A shiver ran down Jake's spine, a chill that had nothing to do with the cool night air. He stood at the edge of Willow Creek, the small town a smudge of light against the looming darkness of the forest. It had been years since he'd last set foot in this place, Willow Creek. The name itself conjured images in his mind, shadowy figures moving through the trees, eyes gleaming in the moonlight. He had come here a young, ambitious agent for Nightwatch. His mission to eliminate the creatures rumored to haunt these woods. But then he saw them. Not monsters, but a family. He lowered his weapon, defying his orders. He let them go, disappearing into the shadows of the forest. What he did, the trust he broke, it carried a price. The flickering light of the fireplace cast dancing shadows across the worn interior of his cabin. Jake sat hunched over a table, a half-empty bottle of whiskey reflecting the flickering flames. The years had etched lines on his face, each one a testament to the secrets he carried. The call had come in the dead of night, a cold, emotionless voice on the other end of the line. Nightwatch had a job for him. Return to Willow Creek. No explanations, no apologies, just a chilling reminder of the debt he owed. They knew about the creatures. The sightings had increased, whispers turning into screams. And they knew he was the only one who could stop it. He knew what they were asking of him, what they demanded. This time, there would be no second chances. This time, there would be blood. The thought sent a shiver down his spine, a cold dread settling in the pit of his stomach. The drive to Willow Creek was a blur of asphalt and regret. Each mile that passed felt like a weight settling heavier on his shoulders. He hadn't told anyone where he was going, hadn't dared to utter the name of the town to a living soul. It felt like a curse, a dark secret he carried with him like a plague. The town itself hadn't changed much, still the same sleepy little town, nestled at the edge of the vast, unforgiving wilderness. But beneath the surface, Jake could sense an undercurrent of fear. The townsfolk whispered in hushed tones, their eyes darting nervously towards the tree line. They knew something was out there. They could feel it watching them. He checked into a rundown motel on the outskirts of town, the kind of place that had seen its fair share of secrets and heartaches. The flickering neon sign outside cast an eerie glow on the rain-slicked asphalt. He was a stranger in a strange land, a ghost returning to the scene of his greatest sin. Sleep offered no reprieve. Nightmares plagued him, filled with images of glowing eyes and guttural growls. He saw the faces of the creatures he had spared, their expressions twisted into grotesque forms of their former selves. They were coming for him, he knew it, but what could he do? And this time, they wouldn't hesitate. The morning mist clung to the forest floor like a shroud. Jake shouldered his pack, the weight of his rifle a familiar burden. He had traded his Nightwatch gear for worn jeans and a faded flannel shirt. He looked every bit the part of a seasoned outdoorsman. He moved with the quiet grace of a man who knew the wilderness intimately. The air was thick with the scent of pine and damp earth. a reminder of the darkness that lurked beneath the surface. He had studied the reports from Willow Creek. They spoke of shadowy figures and blood-curdling screams, of missing livestock and mangled carcasses. The details were vague, fueled by fear, but Jake sensed a grain of truth. He wasn't looking for monsters. He was looking for patterns, for signs of intelligent movement. Years ago, he had chosen mercy over duty. He had allowed his empathy to cloud his judgment. Now, he was back to atone for his sins. Days turned into nights, the forest closing in around him like a living, breathing entity. He moved like a ghost, his presence barely disturbing the delicate balance of the ecosystem. He found signs of their passage. Massive footprints pressed deep into the soft earth. He followed to shoulder trail, his senses on high alert. He was hunting them, yes, but he was also being hunted. The forest was alive with whispers, with the rustling of leaves and the snapping of twigs. He couldn't shake the feeling that he was being herded, led deeper into their territory. He discovered their lair on the 7th day, a natural cave hidden behind a curtain of tangled vines and gnarled branches. The entrance was narrow, almost invisible to the untrained eye, but the air around it was thick with the pungent odor of animal musk and decay. He approached cautiously, his rifle raised, his senses on high alert. The forest had fallen silent, the only sound the pounding of his own heart in his chest. He peered into the gloom, his eyes struggling to adjust to the dim light. The cave floor was littered with bones, the skeletal remains of deer, elk, and smaller animals picked clean. He saw the remnants of a campfire, the charred logs still smoldering faintly, sending tendrils of acrid smoke curling up into the stale air. This was their sanctuary, their haven from the outside world, and he was about to violate it in the most brutal way imaginable. A low growl rumbled from the depths of the cave, sending a jolt of adrenaline surging through his veins. He tightened his grip on his rifle, his finger hovering over the trigger. He was ready for them this time. He had come here with a purpose, with a mission to fulfill. He was the instrument of their destruction, the embodiment of their worst nightmares. He stepped into the cave, his boots crunching on the bone-strewn floor. The darkness enveloped him, swallowing the sounds of the forest, leaving him alone with the echoes of his own breath and the pounding of his own heart. He was no longer the man who had spared them, the man who had seen a flicker of humanity in their eyes. He was the hunter now, the predator stalking his prey, and he would not hesitate to pull the trigger. The forest floor was a treacherous maze of gnarled roots and moss-covered rocks. Each step Jake took sent a jolt of pain through his weary legs. The air was thick with the smell of rain and decay. The forest was a living, breathing entity. He had been drawn back by the ghosts of his past. The whispers in the wind seemed to mock him. The forest held his sins, hidden beneath the canopy. Every shadow seemed to hold a hidden threat. He remembered the first time he had set foot in these woods. He had been so sure of himself, but the creatures he had encountered had challenged his beliefs. He had seen fear in their eyes, but also intelligence. He had betrayed that trust. He had chosen duty over compassion. And now he was back to face the consequences. The forest was a mirror reflecting the darkness in his soul. The days blurred together in a haze of exhaustion and adrenaline. Jake moved through the forest like a phantom, his senses heightened, his every instinct tuned for survival. He followed the tracks of his prey, the massive footprints pressed deep into the soft earth. The trees stripped bare of their bark, the air heavy with the stench of musk. He was the hunter now, yes, but he was also the hunted. He felt their eyes on him, tracking his every move, their presence a constant weight on his chest. The forest was their domain, and they knew its secrets better than he ever could. He was an outsider, an intruder in their world, and they would not tolerate his presence for long. He thought about the creatures he had spared, the family he had allowed to escape. Had they thrived in his absence? Or had they fallen victim to the harsh realities of the wild? Their existence a constant struggle for survival. He had hoped that by sparing them, he had given them a chance, a fighting chance, to live out their lives in peace. But now he wasn't so sure. He had unleashed something unknown, something potentially dangerous into the world, and now he was tasked with cleaning up his own mess. The weight of that responsibility was a heavy burden to bear, and it threatened to crush him beneath its weight. The forest had fallen eerily silent. Gone were the sounds of birdsong and the rustling of small animals in the undergrowth. Even the wind seemed to hold its breath, as if anticipating some cataclysmic event. The air was heavy with tension, crackling with an almost tangible energy that sent shivers down Jake's spine. He had been tracking the creatures for days, following their trail deeper and deeper into the heart of the wilderness. He had found signs of their passing, broken branches, scattered bones, the lingering scent of musk. But the creatures themselves remained elusive, shadows fleeting just beyond his grasp. He knew they were out there, watching him, waiting for the opportune moment to strike. He could feel their presence in the stillness of the forest, in the way the shadows seemed to shift and dance at the edge of his vision. They were toying with him, he realized, herding him like prey into a trap of their own making. A low growl rumbled through the trees, barely audible but unmistakable. It was a sound that sent a primal fear coursing through his veins, a sound that spoke of ancient power and untamed ferocity. The hunt was far from over. It had only just begun. The first time Jake had come to Willow Creek, the forest had felt different, younger maybe, more alive. Back then, the trees had whispered tales of wonder, not warning. Locals whispered of strange creatures lurking in the woods. There had been sightings, grainy photographs, and plaster casts of enormous footprints. Then, one night, everything changed. He heard a low, guttural growl. Adrenaline surged through Jake's veins as he crept through the undergrowth, his rifle held tight against his chest. The moonlight cast long, eerie shadows, transforming familiar shapes into grotesque caricatures. He could feel his heart pounding, a drumbeat of fear against his ribs. The growl ahead was deep, guttural, speaking of immense power and primal hunger. His training kicked in, overriding the fear. He moved with practiced stealth, senses alert to every snap and rustle. Near a stream, he found a massive footprint pressed deep into the earth. The size was staggering, dwarfing even the largest bear tracks. He crouched, examining the print, struggling to reconcile it with the natural world. It was too big, too perfectly formed to be any known animal. As he pushed further, the signs became more frequent. Trees were stripped bare, trunks scarred with deep claw marks. A deer carcass lay mangled, half-eaten, bones picked clean. The air was thick with musk, a pungent, overwhelming odor. The deeper he ventured, the more unease crept over him. It was as if the forest was watching, judging his every move. The shadows deepened, trees closing in like grasping claws. He realized he was no longer the hunter, he was the prey. The forest floor sloped downwards, leading to a clearing shrouded in mist. As Jake moved cautiously into the clearing, his heart pounded in his chest. Two figures, silhouetted against the moonlight, stood in the center of the clearing. Their bodies were covered in thick, dark hair. Their arms long and powerful. Their faces were a mixture of human and ape, with deep-set eyes that seemed to glow with an eerie intelligence. Jake stood frozen, his mind struggling to process what he was seeing. One of the figures took a step towards him, its lips pulled back in a snarl, revealing sharp, predatory teeth. He saw fear in their eyes. It was the fear of a parent protecting its young. The weight of his rifle suddenly felt unbearable. But these creatures, this family, were not attacking. In that moment, Jake faced a choice. He slowly lowered his rifle. He turned and walked away, his fate uncertain. He had spared their lives, and he knew deep in his heart that he would one day have to answer for it. The silence of the forest was almost unbearable. It pressed in on Jake, a suffocating blanket of anticipation. Gone was the youthful eagerness he'd once felt, replaced by a grim determination. He moved through the undergrowth like a wraith, his senses honed. He was a hunter once more, a predator stalking its prey. The guilt gnawed at him, a constant ache in his chest. Now he was back to erase the mistake he had made. He found signs of their passage everywhere he looked. He followed their trail relentlessly, his resolve hardening. But deep down, he knew he was lying to himself. The forest had become a labyrinth, a twisted maze of shadow and light. Jake moved through it with a growing sense of unease. He was no longer certain who was hunting whom. He found himself following game trails he hadn't noticed before, clearings where the undergrowth had been trampled flat. The forest was alive with unseen eyes. He was being herded deeper into their domain. The nights were the worst. The darkness amplified every sound. He would lie awake, gripping his rifle. He dreamt of those eyes glowing in the darkness. He had become a creature of the night, subsisting on protein bars and trail mix. He had lost track of time, losing himself in the hunt. Doubt gnawed at his resolve, whispering insidious doubts in his ear. What if he had been wrong? What if these creatures were not mindless beasts, but something deserving of protection? The memory of the juvenile, its eyes wide with curiosity and fear, haunted him. He had seen a spark of innocence in that gaze, a vulnerability that mirrored his own. He tried to silence the doubts, but they persisted, growing stronger each day. He found himself questioning his orders, the motives of the people who had sent him. What did they truly know about these creatures? What secrets were they hiding? The air hung heavy, thick with the musk of damp earth and decaying wood. A low-hanging mist clung to the forest floor, shrouding the ancient trees. Jake moved through this spectral landscape like a phantom. He had found their sanctuary. He stood at the edge of a hidden glade, a natural cathedral. The scent of wood smoke lingered in the air. His hand tightened around the worn grip of his rifle. The doubts that had plagued him were silenced now. He moved closer, his senses on high alert. Footprints, tiny, perfect footprints, barely larger than a child's hand. The sight of those small tracks tore through the wall of resolve he had so carefully erected around his heart. The undeniable evidence of family, of life in its most pure and vulnerable form, shattered the illusion he had built around himself, and the realization struck him with the force of a physical blow. He moved like a man possessed, his body a weapon honed by years of training. He raised his rifle, the metallic click of the safety echoing through the stillness of the glade. His finger tightened on the trigger, his breath catching in his throat. He had come too far, sacrificed too much to turn back now. A low growl, guttural and menacing, erupted from within the shelter. It was a sound that spoke of primal rage, of a cornered animal defending its young. Jake felt a surge of adrenaline, his finger tightening on the trigger. A shadowy figure emerged from the darkness, its eyes blazing with a fearsome intensity. It was even larger than he remembered, its body covered in thick, matted hair, its arms long and powerful. It moved with surprising speed, its massive frame seeming to defy the laws of physics. Jake fired. The shot echoed through the glade, a deafening roar that shattered the stillness. The creature roared in pain, its body jerking violently as the bullet found its mark. But it didn't fall. It charged, its eyes fixed on Jake with a look of pure, unadulterated hatred. Jake fired again and again, the air filling with the acrid smell of gunpowder. He moved instinctively, his body a blur of motion as he dodged the creature's desperate lunges, but he couldn't escape the inevitable. He had underestimated its speed, its ferocity. The creature slammed into him with the force of a runaway train, the impact driving the air from his lungs. He felt a searing pain in his side as claws raked across his flesh, tearing through muscle and sinew. His rifle clattered uselessly to the ground, lost in the frenzy of violence that had erupted around him. He was vaguely aware of a high-pitched, screeching sound, a sound of pure terror and anguish. He caught a glimpse of a smaller figure, huddled behind a tree, its eyes wide with fear. The juvenile. He had been wrong. There were two. He managed to kick out, connecting with the creature's chest, buying himself a precious moment of respite. He scrambled back, his hand frantically searching for his weapon, his mind racing. He had to finish this. He had to end it. But as he looked into the creature's eyes, he saw something that chilled him to his core. It wasn't just rage he saw there, it was grief, loss, and a cold, calculating fury that promised retribution. He had become the hunted. The silence that settled over the glade was heavier than the oppressive weight of the humid air. It pressed in on Jake, a suffocating blanket woven from the echoes of gunfire and the metallic scent of blood. He lay sprawled on the forest floor, his chest heaving, his body a tapestry of pain. The creature, its chest a bloody ruin, lay still a few feet away. Its eyes, once blazing with fury, were dull and vacant, staring sightlessly at the canopy above. He had won, if victory could be called such a hollow, bitter thing. He had fulfilled his mission, eliminated the threat, silenced the whispers that had haunted him for years. He buried the bodies beneath the ancient oak, their shallow graves marked by a cairn of stones. He worked silently, his movements mechanical, his mind numb with exhaustion. The juvenile watched him from the edge of the glade, its silence more accusing than any scream. He left the glade as silently as he had come, the weight of his sins heavier than the pack on his back. He moved through the forest like a ghost, his spirit broken. The trees seemed to whisper accusations, their branches reaching now talked like skeletal fingers. The drive back to civilization was a blur of asphalt and regret. The world outside the forest seemed alien, a cacophony of noise and light. He checked into a motel on the outskirts of town, a nondescript building that reeked of stale cigarettes and despair. He tried to wash the blood and grime from his skin, but no amount of soap and water could cleanse the stain that had seeped into his soul. He contacted his superiors, relayed the bare bones of his mission. The threat had been neutralized. They were satisfied. He disconnected the call and sat in the silence. He knew with a certainty that chilled him to his core that he wasn't finished with Willow Creek. He stood at the window staring out at the neon-lit silhouette of the town. But beyond the town lay the forest, watching him, waiting for him. He was no longer the hunter. He was the hunted. We hope you enjoyed this installment of Nightwatch. Please like, share, and subscribe so we can continue to bring you interesting and eerie stories of Jacob Hennessy's shady past in Nightwatch.